Greetings, my friends. I want to thank you all for subscribing. I want to thank all of my channel members for supporting me in this endeavor to save pop culture. And if you are not subscribed, please consider supporting this channel. We need you. Thank you. Greetings, my friends. I am Dictor Van Doomcock, the future ruler of Earth, broadcasting from Section X Studios at the center of the Earth, and this is the Pop Culture Breakdown with Overlord DVD, a rundown of the top pop culture stories and rumors of the day. In today's installment, we discuss the latest Alex Kurtzman failure, the cancellation of Clarice on CBS as reported by Deadline, a show so bad even Paramount Plus passed on picking it up. I also have some clarification of recent rumors I reported regarding George Lucas's alleged involvement in Lucasfilm moving forward. I have some analysis of known performance numbers that may lend credence to earlier rumors that The Bad Batch is not doing well on Disney+. I have a look at the cast of the upcoming Netflix series Resident Evil that strongly suggests Raccoon City has been lost to a plague not of zombies, but of wokeness. And Loki is confirmed as gender fluid on its official Twitter account. Oh, lucky Loki. That's a lot to go over, so let's get to it, shall we? Recently, Netflix released a cast photo for their upcoming Resident Evil TV series, and what do you know? Though I hate to jump the gun here, and maybe my eyes are playing tricks on me, it appears that, well, take a look and judge for yourself. So, is it just me, or does that look pretty woke to you? Obviously, woke is not merely diversity casting. Woke encompasses a hostility to males of a certain demographic, and so the question posed here, I suppose, is, while excluding a demographic makes it hard to insult that demographic, is the exclusion itself an insult? Is the exclusion itself hostile? I suppose we won't know for sure how woke Resident Evil is until we see the show, but I can tell you one thing for sure. This cast looks nothing like the video games. For more on this, let's go to our senior woke analyst, Harvey Cthulhu. Harvey, what do you make of this cast picture?
Let me put it this way, oh future ruler of Earth. The casting here is basically a lot of women and people of color, and looking at it, I'm reminded of a box of Crayola crayons, missing just one crayon.
And that's perfectly fine, Harvey. After all, not every show needs to have a complete demographic breakdown and be all-inclusive of everyone.
Au contraire, mon ami. This is exactly what the SJW wokesters have been bitching about forever. Why isn't my woke demographic included? Gotta have gay people, people of every color, trans people, women, differently abled people. This is their method. Only now, it looks like they're evolving their approach and just leaving that one troublesome crayon out of the box. Hypocritical? Could be. Woke? Probably.
Yeah, my main objection is once again, Netflix is completely ignoring the source material, and this kind of stunt diversity casting screams wokeness at the top of its little protesting lungs. Why even license a property if all you're going to do is change most of it beyond recognition?
This isn't gonna appeal much to fans, is it? Netflix is getting weird, dude. Henry Cavill sent up a distress flare about Season 2 of The Witcher, saying that Geralt is not going to be the focus of the show. It'll be more about the girls this time around. Then we've got The Irregulars, a woke shit show about a bunch of minority youth who are actually doing all the crime solving for Mr. Sherlock Holmes, who is just, I guess, exploiting their labor in a colonial, colonizing kind of patriarchal way. And now, we've got a version of Resident Evil that looks nothing like Resident Evil, and the plague likely isn't the T-virus, it's wokeness.
Being a Resident Evil fan who enjoyed all the movies, even the bad ones...
There were good ones?
I have to say, I am not at all looking forward to Resident Evil on Netflix. And now, this. And in the feel-good department, yet another failure has been racked up by Alex Kurtzman, as his television series Clarice is reportedly as dead as a rusty doornail driven into a coffin full of horrible bad robot scripts and dumped in the Marianas Trench, where even volcanic vent worms who feast on boiling sulfur would rather cook slowly than read them. According to an article in Deadline, not even Paramount Plus is willing to pick up this latest Kurtzman calamity. Quote, "A month ago, Clarice was poised to move from CBS to Paramount Plus with the promise of a long run for a premium version of the Silence of the Lambs sequel. Now, prospects for the series appear bleak as negotiations between the Viacom CBS streamer and co-producer MGM have reached a stalemate." Additionally, the article continues, "I hear there is no viable path for Clarice to continue on CBS, as the broadcast network is already committed to a full slate of series for next season. That don't suck. It would mean the end of the road for the high-profile drama, barring a major breakthrough in the Paramount Plus negotiations, which currently appears unlikely. Reps for Paramount Plus and MGM declined comment. Industry veterans describe this as one of the craziest situations they have seen, where a show with a season 2 pickup is facing a demise and the prospect of putting 300 people out of work. It involves a marquee IP, Silence of the Lambs, a quote, top, unquote producer, Alex Kurtzman, a recently merged company, Viacom CBS, and an about-to-be-merged studio, MGM, which is in the process of being acquired by Amazon. Depending on who you talk to, MGM either abruptly stopped good-faith negotiations that were closing in on an agreement, or the studio opted to walk away after being offered a mediocre deal it could not accept. Depending on who you talk to, eh? Well, too bad they didn't talk to me. I think I could have shed some light on why Clarice was one of the lowest rated shows on CBS. For one thing, what genius thought they could get away with making a Hannibal Lecter TV show without Hannibal Lecter? Alex Kurtzman, that's who. Ah, Lecter Schmechter. We'll give him the moth with the skull on it. We'll give him some Clarice working on much less interesting cases than, say, the ones that ignited the public's imagination with Hannibal Lecter. Ah, it'll do just fine. They'll never miss him. Well, if by just fine you mean at the bottom of the barrel where nobody watched it, CBS had to cancel it, and Paramount Plus didn't want to fork over the money necessary to keep such a complete waste of time afloat, then sure, Clarice was just Jim Dandy, just right as rain. It just strikes me as funny that no one seems to be considering that this mess was created by Alex Kurtzman, who also, by no coincidence whatsoever, created one of the only other shows to do worse than Clarice, Star Trek Discovery, which was the absolute rock-bottom show for CBS in 2020. So the only question at this point is, how long before CBS promotes Kurtzman to be head of programming at Viacom CBS? After all, he failed with Star Trek Discovery, and then they gave him Clarice and more Star Trek shows to fuck up. His rise to the top is inevitable and meteoric at Viacom CBS, where apparently failing upwards is a way of life. As for me, I am mightily amused by this epic failure on the part of Alex Kurtzman, yet another in a long line of these particular failures, I might add. But as for Hollywood wising up and getting a reality wake-up call, I am not holding my breath. And now, this. On the previous episode of Pop Culture Breakdown, I reported some rumors regarding the allegedly poor performance of Bad Batch on Disney+. The Bad Batch is a pretty good show, all told. It has a lot to recommend it. However, my one complaint about this show is how much it focuses on yet another little kid. Just like The Mandalorian focused on Baby Yoda and his heartstring-tugging impact on a hardened mercenary, so too does Bad Batch seem increasingly focused on Omega and her heartstring-tugging impact on these hardened warriors. To be clear, as a character, I like Omega just fine. She's a sweet kid. But does a sweet kid really belong in a show about clones who are so badass they're known as the Bad Batch? This seems to me to be a huge problem in terms of structure. At this point, is this going to be some kind of a formula where we have to have a lovable moppet for kids on every single Disney Plus show to identify with at the expense of verisimilitude and authentic kick-assery? Well, I hope not, because we need a severed arm on the barroom floor. We need a Bad Batch badass to mow down some schmuck that has the drop on him, like Han Solo did. Star Wars was always a kick-ass rollicking adventure for all ages, and Bad Batch is sadly falling short of that. Now, what I'm about to share with you is information provided by a source claiming to have inside information at Disney and/or Lucasfilm, but since I cannot verify any of it, I am presenting it to you as unverified rumor, and I ask you to take it all with a grain of salt. According to my source, who reports on these Disney numbers, Bad Batch is still running at around 300,000 views on Disney+, though I'm informed this last episode did pick up a little in terms of viewers. But given that these are rumors, is there any way to confirm this? Are the rumors regarding the poor performance of Bad Batch on Disney Plus true? While there is no way to tell for certain, our roving reporter, Valiant Renegade, has some interesting analysis to share that could support the claim. Valiant Renegade, what have you uncovered?
While determining the performance of traditionally delivered linear television content is relatively simple, direct-to-consumer content like Netflix or Disney Plus is much more difficult to ascertain. There's generally very little publicly available information to gauge whether a show is doing well or not compared to its peers. However, in the case of Star Wars, fortunately, there's enough publicly available data from other sources consistent enough that can provide us some idea of how a show is performing, be it good or ill, and gauge fan interest in that property. The details of this data and how it was compiled for this report is a bit lengthy to go into here, but I will be explaining the methodology in a separate video on my channel to be released relatively soon. Suffice it to say, we did employ as much of a mathematical approach as possible with publicly available information from sources that we felt provided a large enough sample size and a consistent track record of delivering timely Star Wars episodic reviews and content. That being said, from what Renegade Studios could compile, we have a high degree of confidence in Overlord DVD's source that suggests that the Bad Batch is underperforming Disney's expectations. In fact, one of the most disturbing trends we found, unique to the Bad Batch, is that fan interest seems to have started very high going in on the first episode, but then dropped precipitously in episodes 2 through 6, averaging around 30 to 45% of that of episode 1. The Clone Wars Season 7 and The Mandalorian both started at relative lows compared to where they ended, but they consistently built up dramatically as the season went on, reaching huge peaks in the final weeks. It's obviously too soon to tell if the Bad Batch will achieve this same metric, but the trends thus far following the first episode surely have the higher-ups at Disney very concerned. Now, this is not to suggest that the show is good or bad, it is merely a gauge of fan interest at this point. On behalf of Section X Studios, this is Valiant Renegade. Doomcock, back to you.
Thank you, Valiant Renegade, for this very intriguing analysis. In other reporting from my source, which again I ask you to take with a grain of salt, I'm told Cruella is dead in terms of views on Disney+, so it's up to Black Widow to save the premium side of Disney+ if it can. And my source further claims that Loki did very well on Disney+, coming in at 40 million views so far. If true, Loki is off to a great start in terms of ratings, and Disney is reportedly hoping this is the turning point. Ah, if this was only the case. Because Loki is getting more wokey all the time. Last week, in my review of the first episode of Loki Season 1, I gave it an unfavorable review because Loki himself was absurdly belittled and the episode itself was jam-packed with the kind of wokeness that people despise. Well, turns out all the rumors were correct, And Loki is going even more wokey according to Loki's own official Twitter feed. Take a look at this image and this tweet. Now, take a look at the dossier, in particular the entry next to sex. What does that say? Yes, my friends, according to his official dossier, Loki is now being presented as gender fluid. And no, not the Ron Jeremy kind of gender fluid. We're talking something else entirely. While this has been the case in comics and in Norse mythology, since Loki is a trickster god, he has been known to switch back and forth between male and female. This has never been the case in the MCU until now. According to the Daily Wire, Disney Plus promo claims Marvel supervillain Loki is gender fluid. According to a recent show promo, the shape-shifting character will be portrayed as gender fluid and able to change sex as he morphs in the television program debuting Wednesday. As noted by Collider, a quirky 18-second ad for the upcoming Marvel Studios show featured a folder and dossier in which Loki's sex is classified as fluid. We have already seen that Loki has the ability to disguise himself as other people. However, we have never seen him shapeshift into someone of the opposite sex, noted Collider. That appears to be changing as the TVA's folder lists Loki's sex as fluid in a blink and you'll miss it detail. This is just not an exciting addition of explicit LGBTQ+ representation in the MCU. This all but confirms the addition of Lady Loki in the show. To get you caught up, Lady Loki is essentially no different from the Loki we've come to know and love, the article continued. Although she does have one major difference, and that is that she was created after the god inhabited a human body previously meant for the spirit of Lady Sif. Loki was able to take over this body, using it in recent years to do what he does best, trick and manipulate. Going into its much anticipated Phase 4, the Marvel Cinematic Universe appears to be living up to a promise to amplify and increase LGBTQ representation in big ways. So there you have it, gang. By hook or by scissor, Loki is firmly being skewed toward the woke demographic, transforming Loki from a supervillain into an LGBTQ+ hero, as it is also rumored that his previous villainy all throughout the MCU was the result of some kind of outside influence, and he really was a swell guy all along, and that is not canon in the comics. That is one rumor I really hope isn't true, and incidentally, that rumor did not come from any of my sources. And now, this. Star Wars under Kathleen Kennedy has been floundering for quite some time now, but there is a new hope on the horizon according to some. In a previous edition of Pop Culture Breakdown, I reported a rumor that George Lucas had recently had a meeting with the Killer Bees, Bob Iger and Bob Chapek, along with Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau, and according to that rumor, George Lucas was looking at creating another Star Wars trilogy and might even be looking to sink a financial stake back into Star Wars. Well, since then, I've heard from a couple of different sources who claimed that this reporting was off in some regards. However, since I cannot independently verify any of this, I must present what I'm about to tell you as unverified rumor and ask you to take it with a grain of salt. In fact, given that this reporting is from a source I am very uncertain of, I would take it with a lot of salt. Now, from what I've been told, George Lucas did indeed take a meeting at Lucasfilm regarding a new trilogy, as well as regarding assisting in righting the ship when it comes to the direction Star Wars will take in the near future. Now, this makes a lot of sense. If Kennedy is moving on to greener pastures, as the vast preponderance of evidence seems to indicate, it is vital to Disney's interest to get Star Wars back on the right track with fans, and so who better to help chart that new direction than the father of Star Wars himself, George Lucas. From what I've heard, George Lucas is not going to be putting any kind of financial stake back into Star Wars. This makes perfect sense, as Disney is not the kind to share in the fruits of its IPs. It may be that Lucas made the offer to reinvest in Star Wars, which may have been the source of that particular rumor, but from what I'm hearing now, that ain't going to happen. It is also rumored that while George Lucas will not be directing a new trilogy according to proposals being considered, no surprise given that Lucas in the past hasn't really enjoyed directing all that much, Disney and Lucas are reportedly in talks about him producing the next trilogy, overseeing it and guiding it to make sure it doesn't suck like the last trilogy, and leaving the television end of things in the capable hands of Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni. I see this as a very hopeful development, a change in direction and attitude that could possibly pull Star Wars back from the edge of utter oblivion. But that said, only time will tell. According to reporting from other sources, George Lucas's idea for the proper sequel trilogy, meaning the official sequel trilogy since the garbage made by Abrams, Johnson, and Kennedy, is more along the lines of fan films made by people who aren't fans. Lucas's idea was going to be set a few years after Return of the Jedi and would have focused on Leia as the main character. According to an article on IndieWire, quoting Lucas from an interview in a Taschen book called The Star Wars Archives, Lucas also intended to bring back Darth Maul for his sequel trilogy. Quote, Lucas intended to resurrect Star Wars The Phantom Menace villain Darth Maul and turn him into the main antagonist of the trilogy. Darth Maul would appear with mechanical legs and become the godfather of crime in the universe because, as the Empire falls, he takes over. In the Star Wars Archives, Lucas elaborated on his plans. Quote, there's a power vacuum, so gangsters like the Hutts are taking advantage of the situation, and there is chaos. The key person is Darth Maul, who had been resurrected. The key person is Darth Maul, who had been resurrected in the Clone Wars cartoons. He brings all the gangs together. Maul's very old, and we have two versions of him. One is with a set of cybernetic legs like a spider, and then later on he has metal legs and he was a little bit bigger, more of a superhero. Darth Maul trained a girl, Darth Talon, who was in the comic books as his apprentice. She was the new Darth Vader and most of the action was with her. So these were the two main villains of the trilogy. According to IndieWire, the return of Darth Maul was teased in the Star Wars film franchise in Solo, A Star Wars Story. The villain was revealed to have not only survived the events of the Phantom Menace, but also to have climbed the ladder of organized crime in the galaxy as the superior to Crimson Dawn Syndicate boss Dryden Voss. It's presumed he's the leader of the organization. The reveal set up Darth Maul to be a major presence in a Solo sequel, although the movie's poor box office performance has squashed those plans for now, unquote. Lucas also intended to develop Leia as the chosen one in his trilogy. According to IndieWire, quote, just as the original Star Wars trilogy focused on Luke, the sequel trilogy would focus on Leia. As Lucas explained, the movies are about how Leia, who else is going to be the leader, is trying to rebuild the Republic. Luke is trying to restart the Jedi. In the Star Wars Archives, George Lucas said, quote, it starts out a few years after Return of the Jedi, and we establish pretty quickly that there's this underworld, there are these offshoot stormtroopers who started their own planets, and that Luke is trying to restart the Jedi. He puts the word out, so out of 100,000 Jedi, maybe 50 or 100 are left. The Jedi have to grow again from scratch, so Luke has to find 2- and 3-year-olds and train them. It'll be 20 years before you have a new generation of Jedi. Okay, you fought the war, you killed everybody, now what are you going to do? Rebuilding afterwards is harder than starting a rebellion or fighting the war. When you win the war and you disband the opposing army, what do? The stormtroopers would be like Saddam Hussein's Ba'athist fighters that joined ISIS and kept on fighting. The stormtroopers refuse to give up when the Republic wins, unquote. An intriguing scenario from George Lucas, one that would obviously involve recasting all the major roles. Could this be the storyline Lucas might theoretically be looking to revive with another sequel trilogy? Certainly, if Disney was looking to recast the classic characters, it makes a good deal of sense that Disney would want the involvement of George Lucas as cover for this move. Sanctioned by the creator of Star Wars, With Disney publicly kissing his ring, the casting of someone like Sebastian Stan as Luke Skywalker might go down with fans a lot easier with the visible and public blessing and involvement of George Lucas. Makes you think, doesn't it? And while this is just a rumor, I'm hopeful this may well be a new direction for Star Wars moving forward. And that concludes this episode of the Pop Culture Breakdown with Overlord DVD. From Section X Studios at the center of the Earth, this is Dictor Van Doomcock bidding you all, my friends, stay angry. Ha 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 ha.